This is Anique Anderson from CISCRP. I just wanted to welcome you to this webinar, and I very much appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. I will pass it over to Ken Getz, who will take us through the first half of the presentation, and then I will close the second half of the presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions. Ken?
Thank you, Anique. Good morning, everyone. I want to personally welcome you as well to our program this morning, our webinar. It's really a chance for us to share with you our experience to date with patient advisory boards. During the past 18 months, CISCRP has seen tremendous growth, significant growth in the use of this particular approach to soliciting insights from patients across a wide variety of critical operating areas, and we want to share our experience with you. Let's just go to the first slide, our agenda slide. What I'd like to do is just set the stage briefly to provide some context for you. Why are advisory boards becoming, in many respects, a standard activity for a large number of organizations, and for others it's becoming a critical form of input on select or high visibility projects. And then we'll move into a discussion, a detailed overview of our unique patient advisory board approach and the experience and impact that we have seen to date. So if we could just go to the next slide. What I'd like to do is really set the stage by talking about why patient advisory boards are so critical to your organization's patient engagement initiatives. And we know that patient engagement is central to so much of our enterprise's clinical activity, with the ultimate goal to engage the patient as a partner in the research process. And why is that so critical? Where there are so many places, there are so many areas where we need the patient's input to help us address some of our most demanding challenges, including protocol complexity, even more broadly, ways that we can make the research experience enhanced for the study volunteer to improve our recruitment and retention rates, their satisfaction, and even more importantly, to establish a level of relevance to our study volunteers so they take ownership and they take pride in their ability to partner with the research enterprise in research activity. This slide gives you a flavor for the complexity of our protocols today, and they have really become far more demanding over time. This table shows you the typical phase 3 protocol in different time periods. These are averages separated by a 10-year time horizon. Across every measure, both measures of scientific complexity as well as operating complexity, we see huge increases. The total number of endpoints, for example, has nearly doubled. The total number of procedures that are performed and the number of procedures per visit has increased substantially. Total number of eligibility criteria on average is now around 50 inclusion and exclusion criteria. We also see increases in the number of investigative sites that are engaged or participating in a trial, each being asked to recruit a smaller number of patients. All of these critical variables that help define protocol complexity have been changing. They've been increasing. Complexity is associated with so many operating challenges. The challenge of managing amendments. The complexity is associated with a higher number of amendments. Longer cycle times are associated with more complex protocols. Recruitment and retention is another area impacted by protocol complexity. To hit that point home, I just want to go to the next slide. Conveys some of the findings from several recent Tough Center studies. On the left-hand side, you see that across all therapeutic areas, the typical study has to double the planned enrollment period in order to recruit the requisite number of patients. On the right-hand side, we see the typical pattern for a large multi-center study. There are typically 10% of all sites, even after we double the planned enrollment duration period, that 10% of sites will fail to enroll a single patient. Nearly 40% will under-enroll, and this is clearly a very costly group because these are sites that have been activated and that now need to be monitored and managed. So complexity is one of the key areas where we need insight to really help us manage our feasibility and improve the execution of our studies, and ultimately that will have a huge impact on the number of unplanned and unbudgeted amendments, and we believe will have a huge impact on recruitment and retention rates. And as I mentioned at the outset, and most importantly, we believe it will impact patient satisfaction, where we also, as you'll see in a minute, some data suggesting that that is one of the most critical factors of importance to our volunteers. Let's go to the next slide. The patient and their community of care take their decision to participate very seriously, and there are so many areas where the patient is looking for information to help them make an informed decision. And there's much that we can learn from our study volunteers and from patients, insight that can really help us understand ways that we can make our protocols more feasible, we can make them the participation burden reduced, and can ensure that our study volunteers are involved in a protocol that it makes more sense given a lot of the demands that will be placed on them as participants in the study. The next slide. The slide you just saw really gives you a sense for some of the high information need areas at the outset of a trial, and many of those information areas will influence not only the decision to participate, but play a part in the informed consent form review process. At the end of a trial, we have conducted a number of assessments to really understand what contributes to study volunteer satisfaction, and I want to focus on the right-hand side for a minute. What are some of the factors that volunteers typically least like? And the bulk of these all touch on the areas that relate to convenience and the logistics of study participation, the location of the research center, the number of procedures that were performed, the amount of time that has to be spent for the study visits. The point being that the patient has very strong feelings about their experience, and they can articulate a lot of their expectations when we approach them for that input and that insight. Next slide. Slowly gathering a lot of data that really conveys the level of adoption that we're observing now throughout the enterprise of a variety of patient engagement or patient centricity initiatives. A recent study that the Tufts Center has been involved with has shared or has demonstrated for us that a fairly high percentage of companies are regularly now conducting some patient-centric initiatives, and another 15 to 20% tell us that they're planning to add additional engagement initiatives, and they're conducting these initiatives across a variety of phases, with our phase 3 programs being the most common place where you see these initiatives playing a role. In another study that will soon be published, the Tufts Center found that among leading companies, in this case 10 that were profiled, all 10 of them reported that they are using patient advisory boards on a pilot basis, or a number of them are now implementing patient advisory boards across a large percentage of their clinical trials activities. Let's just go to the next slide. We're also seeing very high interest among patients in playing an active part in providing feedback to us as we conduct our research activity and as we design our studies. The insights that we can gather from the patient community can play a critical role in helping us understand how participation in our protocols, our complex protocols, can be improved, and ways that we can communicate the goals and objectives and the endpoints of our studies and what is required of our participants when we are discussing it, all of these aspects during the informed consent form review. As I've set the stage, I want to now turn it over to Anik, who will walk through our specific Patient Advisory Board initiative.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome again. I'm happy to now that Ken set the stage, talk to you a little bit more about our experiences with patient advisory boards at CISCRP. Before I dive into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how CISCRP thinks about its own patient engagement initiatives, since we're often asked that question. And it's really built around the patient journey, which starts way before clinical trial participation, when they first become aware and start thinking about a clinical trial. And of course, during their participation and also after their participation ends, and ways that we can stay connected to that study volunteer. So on the left-hand side, we have the educate period here. And this focuses on the public and future study volunteers. We have a variety of programs, and most familiar to most of you is probably our Aware for All program, which is a free educational program that's held in various communities around and actually outside the U.S. as well. You know, we have public service announcements and various speaking opportunities. And again, this is meant to focus on educating and raising awareness among the public. On the right-hand side, we have the Enable pyramid, and really this focuses on the healthcare providers, sponsors, and site communities. And this is the initiatives meant to support those stakeholders and the patient care and patient and care network advisory boards are part of that initiative. And the top pyramid, we have the Connect. This is a way to stay connected after someone's study experience has ended. Clinical trial results program, returning summary results back to past study volunteers, helps keep us connected, maintain that connection through prior study volunteers. So we've had quite a few patient advisory boards, especially over the past year, and I thought what we could start with is kind of some of the things that we've learned to date on the patient advisory boards, and we thought we'd share that with you. So the first thing is that the in-person format, we found that to be optimal in terms of establishing the strongest rapport with patients. And I don't think anybody would really argue that, you know, placing a face to the name and really having, you know, able to read those personal reactions is really critical. Create an atmosphere that's conducive to open conversation is also critically important. We found that through creating or having a board with not too many participants, which can become unwieldy, and maintaining a comfortable atmosphere is really important to getting that really rich feedback from patients and allowing them to feel comfortable to share some of their opinions and their journeys. So learn to be very flexible. One format may not be the best depending on the objectives or needs. We should absolutely be open to perhaps be open to changing the format, maybe in person with a combination of virtual formats is best. And also keeping things simple. I think all of us that are heavily involved in the industry tend to sometimes use industry jargon and forgetting that perhaps someone may not be familiar with those terms. So I think when we present materials and we facilitate meeting, it's really important to keep things at a basic level and make sure to have the participants feel comfortable and ask questions if they don't understand something. Giving patients and caregivers ample time to share their journey. We found, sponsors often want to dive quickly into their protocols and getting feedback on their protocol designs. When it's up front, it's really important to allow the patients and caregivers ample time to share their journey. They're willing to help, they're willing to share their feedback, but they do want to share their own journey along the way as well. Again, we've seen patients and caregivers really appreciate meeting the sponsor representative in person and hearing a personal thank you. A simple gesture goes a very, very long way in generating goodwill. It's important to have a knowledgeable facilitator, making sure that person is familiar with the clinical research process in general, able to explain in a simple fashion to patients and caregivers. So this, there's various different formats and there's various different ways of collecting patient feedback. And obviously these two formats are not the only way, in-person and virtual online meetings. Telephone interviews can also be conducted. But we put a side-by-side comparison here just to see what the benefits, the pros and cons are of each. For in-person, like I mentioned previously, it's a helpful way to establish the strongest rapport with patients. It's easiest to probe. It's easier to draw out some participants that may be more quiet than others. You really have an opportunity to get the richest feedback from patients. Also, if you have something that you want to expose to patients, such as a tablet or some type of technology that you want them to interact with, usually the in-person format is the best. The in-person format, obviously it's a smaller participant pool. There's a lot of logistics involved in getting patients to the venue or conference facility and arranging planning and around work days and things of that nature always can take longer. Some of the virtual panels obviously are, you can get a great global diverse group of participants and perhaps even a larger group of participants. And it may be easier to schedule as well since there's no travel required. However, some of the cons of that format is that it's often a very difficult to sometimes get everyone involved in the conversation, especially perhaps the quieter participants. Sometimes there's a lower commitment rate, and obviously we all know or are familiar with this, there could be some technical challenges as well. So our experience, we've put together just an idea of what our preferred structure and format is. Again, keeping in mind that we're very flexible and there could be, depending on the needs and objectives of the sponsor, there could be a different design that could be best. But typically this is the way we set them up. Again, it's just an in-person meeting, and it could be a single meeting or an ongoing series of meetings, depending if you have a particular initiative that you want to get feedback on at different time points. Typically, it's 6 to 8 patients and caregivers. I think that's the ideal size. It's typically your target patient population. And we also like to include a mix of prior study volunteers as well as those who don't have any clinical study volunteer experience as well, because I think that gives a good diverse feedback. Typically half-day meeting, and it's in a location obviously that's convenient and easy for patients to get to. We've covered a wide range of topics, and we've just provided a sampling here, and it's really, it could be topics at all phases of drug development. In terms of some of the study design elements, we've exposed a schedule of assessments, getting some feedback there to identify ways that we could ease the burden on patients. Informed consent forms, I think we're all aware there's certain required elements of informed consent form, and sometimes that form cannot be changed. However, different ways that we can present some of the information to make it easier for a patient to understand or caregiver. There's different patient recruitment, promotional messages, imagery, that we could expose to patients to get their feedback. Does this resonate with them? What are ways or messages that we can provide that really would catch someone's attention? Exposed different packaging for medicine, trial medicine kits, administration methods, and getting feedback there. Also expose patients to different technology solutions, iPads for testing electronic health questionnaires. We've tested instructions, so a wide variety of topics, very flexible in terms of what can be exposed. Access all these patient advisory board members from, and there's a variety of resources that we use. Typically, we have partnerships with patient advocacy groups, or we also have our CISCRP patient community. Sometimes we may have a little bit more criteria that require a broader outreach. We have several different resources there as well. We have Center Watch, which has a large global patient traffic population as well. And we have some global health websites as well. So again, there's the key way here is that there's many different resources that we can draw from. Some of the patient advisory board service elements, we really provide comprehensive support. We collaborate throughout the study from start to finish with the sponsor very, very closely. It really starts, again, at the beginning with the kickoff meeting, and it's really getting a deep understanding of what the primary objectives are, what type of feedback you're soliciting from patients, what are we trying to get an understanding of and recommendations on. Then we go and develop a discussion guide collectively with you, and typically this is just a guide that the moderator uses, and it typically follows a certain format. We basically start the discussion off broadly, talking about the patient's condition, and then go into just a general clinical trials knowledge and awareness discussion, and then finally we get into the study-related materials. Or, and it depends on the topic, it could be something very general as well, where the topic, the guide would not follow that format. Most typically, that's the format we follow. We can take a look at some of the materials that you'd like to expose, and we can certainly help you provide or help convert that into some lay language versions. We also submit to an ethical review board committee the research project, and again, this is not a requirement, but this is something that we do just as an additional layer of oversight. We prepare all the materials, we provide the participants with the consent form, we develop that, and we make sure they're aware of what they're getting into before starting their participation in the meeting. And of course, we coordinate all the activities leading up to the meeting, we coordinate the venue, like I said, we facilitate the meeting. We make sure that it's a very interactive discussion. We actually highly encourage sponsor representatives of the project team to actively get involved and participate if they're comfortable in the meeting and discussion. We typically audio record the meeting, and it's just for note-taking purposes, and we want to make sure that we capture everyone's comments accurately and correctly. We actually use that transcript to prepare the final report on the results. So this is a typical standard timeline, and it varies, of course. This I would say is typical in the U.S. We can turn this around in 6 weeks, sometimes less. But there's elements. If we have done a couple of these outside the U.S. Sometimes that takes longer. Especially with the IRB review process outside the U.S. can take longer, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with that as well. So typically developing the moderator guide and patient criteria takes 2 weeks. And then participant recruitment process and arranging all the logistics, that takes a couple of weeks as well. And then obviously the patient advisory board meeting only takes a day. And then following that, ultimately 2 weeks to turn around the draft final report, and then you have the option of revising that or editing that, and we're happy to finalize that. Deliverables, like I said, the meeting was recorded. We use the transcript. We also, I meant to mention, immediately following the patient advisory board meeting, we typically meet with the project team, have a debrief. I think it really helps to write down all those top of mind, fresh takeaways immediately following meeting. So some of those notes as well as the transcript to help identify some key themes and learnings and help build that report. And then we typically go through the transcript and pull out some quotes to represent those findings. Typical report structure is project overview, objectives, methodology, and then findings by topic area, as well as the quotes that I just mentioned. Again, it's a standard report structure. If there's something more customized that you're looking for, we're happy to do that as well. Once we go through the transcript and remove any identifying information that's provided to you, and then, like I said, we're happy to arrange a presentation with the broader clinical team to kind of go over results and help facilitate a discussion of the findings as well, if needed. So before, we've seen quite a bit of growth, especially in the past year, on patient advisory boards, so we've conducted quite a few. We've spoken to over 150 patients and caregivers to date, and we've really had a great global experience, if you will. We've had many patient advisory boards held in the U.S. and also quite a few outside the U.S. and Canada and Europe as well. And we've had a diverse set of participants, as you'll see in the next slide as well. We've spoken to both patients and caregivers in various different sets depending on the conversation. In terms of our experience, we've and on the left you'll see here we've had experience in various therapeutic areas, including oncology, immunology, rheumatology, many rare diseases as well. On the right-hand side, we conducted an exercise and wanted to quantify any actual patient recommendations came through since we started patient advisory boards. And you'll see most of the time, you know, the recommendations are on patient-facing study materials, the consent forms, but we've also identified some improvements related to the protocol as well, and schedule of visits. For some of the recommendations that come through, and you know, all of these are directly from patient. I've kept this very general, obviously. This will give you a sense for the kinds of things you can expect from a patient advisory board. So on the left-hand side, some of the recommendations that we've come across for the protocol itself, where a patient advisory board for a very aggressive condition, and patients in general were concerned because the monitoring assessments were spaced too far, and they were concerned that their condition would come back too aggressively. So really called for more frequent monitoring assessments to help ease and soothe patients' concern regarding that. At another patient advisory board where there were frequent painful diagnostics exams scheduled, and patients with condition really learned about the frequency of the exam, and as a result, the sponsor ended up reducing the number of exams of this procedure. I think we're familiar with the option of home visits, and you know, this time and again, this really helps ease the burden of participation for someone if the option is given where they can have some of those visits, clinic visits, be conducted at home where somebody visits them at their home. Identified across a few of these patient advisory boards some critical study-specific information to provide one that's considering participation. And what I mean by that is that For example, providing the rationale for a particular study design, for example. They want to know exactly why that is. You know, provide them with an explanation, provide them with more information. On the right, these are just some of the patient materials and things that we've gathered from conducting advisory boards in the U.S. and outside the U.S. and in various different countries, actually. It's interesting to hear some of the differences in terms of even the wording and the color schemes used. Some resonate more than others. Some is for the condition. We hear that time and time again as well. They want to see somebody they can relate with on the materials. Recommendations were additions of tables and search features. If they want to go back to something, for example, like the informed consent form, are they able to search something quickly, electronically for a key term or something like that, if they want to look something up quickly. Instructions, we've shown and actually have gone through runs of patient instructions and seeing, you know, works and what doesn't work when somebody's actually at home on their own trying something out or trying to put something together. That's part of the protocol. Preferences and styles and formats, again, that relates, again, to tables and ways of presenting information in different formats that's easier for somebody to understand. And then just convenience and accessibility in terms of the information. How do they want to receive it? Is it via email or is it a website through a secure way, or is it a tablet? You know, what are some ways that we can provide this information that's easier for somebody to access? So recap some of the key benefits of patient advisory board meetings. I think, like I said, that in-person format especially really helps to helps a sponsor to really develop an in-depth understanding. What are some of the things that cross people's minds when they're considering participation? Remember, that journey from start to finish is well before they start their participation and well after they end their participation. What are ways that we can enhance experiences for future study volunteers? What are ways that we can ease the participation burden? And again, you know, some of those recommendations that I mentioned, those are easy things to fix. It's not necessarily a huge change to the protocol, but it makes a huge difference to a patient. And again, you know, what ways that we can make study communication and materials relevant and resonate with patients. And again, I think that some of the things that we came out with are very simple, easy fixes. Most importantly, and I go back to my first couple slides here, the simpler of saying thank you from the sponsor really goes a long way. And I can't tell how many times patients are so excited to see that pharmaceutical companies are willing to listen. And I think it does a great deal, these patient advisory boards, to build goodwill towards the clinical research enterprise as a whole. Some quotes from patients, and again, I'm not going to read these out to you, but essentially here you can see, and it kind of, you can, from these quotes, that it comes across their enthusiasm and awe that pharmaceutical companies are actually finally interested in their opinion and interested in listening to what I have to say regarding research designs. An overview of some of the companies who have engaged with CISCRP on patient advisory board activity. We've had wonderful experiences with these sponsors as well. Now, I've presented all this information. You may ask yourself, well, how do I get started? What are some of the key steps to getting a patient advisory board set up within my own organization? And the first couple of steps are actually very simple. And like I said, CISCRP supports you throughout the process. And the first step, if you will, really to schedule an informational meeting with CISCRP and help educate your project team on the process. And during that meeting, we can also review some of the objectives from the study team and what are some of the potential timelines, and answer any questions that the team may have in terms of the format, the way it works, and outputs and things of that nature. Following that meeting, we usually develop a proposal and we submit it to you for your review. And then we're happy to edit the proposal, the design, depending on what your needs are. And then obviously we have to go through a contracting process. Once that's finished, we schedule a kickoff meeting with you and your team to get the project started. I just wanted to open it up to a discussion or questions that we can answer for you. And you know, I just want to thank you very, very much for your time again. And really, maybe we can open up the discussion.
Unmute, or perhaps it might be best if you have a question, you can just, I believe, unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
By clicking on the side, right, the icon on the right.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon to everybody. This is, I'm Helen Kellerwood, and I'm calling from Bristol Myers Squibb. And I'd like to thank Ken and Anik for a very interesting presentation. I'd be very interested to hear a little bit more about your experience in conducting the patient advisory boards globally, and if there are any specific lessons learned in that capacity. That would be interesting. Thank you.
Absolutely. So like I said, our experience globally, I guess I'll talk about our experience in Europe. I think the biggest learning that we have from there is to allow yourself plenty of time to plan overseas. I think like I said, we do go through an ethics review process overseas, and we found, you know, in some countries, let's say for the UK, for example, the process can take a significant amount of time with a lot more effort. So you really need to incorporate that into your timeline. I think also, obviously, I think it's important to be aware of various cultural differences. And I think that's the most interesting, actually, especially if you're launching a global protocol in different countries. The perspective can be very, very different from one country to another. So I need to keep in mind as well. And also, it's important to hold the meeting in the local language, and also obviously have the materials in the local language as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
From Ingelheim. I have one question. I think that it's wonderful that the industry is asking patients these questions. I was curious, do you have any insight as to how the industry is adopting this feedback that they're receiving? Is it moving the needle?
I think that's always a great question and important. And I think the sponsors we've spoken with have really taken some steps to really measure the impact. And for example, you know, it's you know, one of, you know, what do we do with the information that we get out of these patient advisory boards is essentially the question. And sponsors have put together formal processes for saying, okay, well, the patient made XYZ recommendation, you know, what actually happened, and tracking what actually happened in the protocol itself. Did we actually make that change? Tracking that internally. And obviously each sponsor has their different process in place, but I know that that's an important this. It's really, you know, what's the ROI? You know, what's for the time and effort that's invested into this? You know, what do we get out of it, and what changes are actually made? hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you might have something to add. I know that you talked about the pens, measuring the impact that they're having on your dolls and.
Hi, Annie. Yes, thank you. Actually, we are measuring, yes, but to be transparent, we have not really got to a point where we can actually measure it in a reduction in number of amendments. I think that there's certainly sort of some elements that can be made as to, as you said, how the protocol is being tracked. What changes are made. You can track how patients are communicated after, the thank yous, the acknowledgements, that sort of thing. You can put, sort of some formal processes around that. But when it comes down to sort of those longer term impacts and ROIs, like reduction number of amendments, we have not yet actually got to a point where we can measure that data, but that I think would be very for this as from one standpoint as to actually reduce the cost of clinical trials over time. So I think that would be very valuable, but then you get to those intangible benefits of patients contributing and really changing the around the clinical trial process. And I think that's harder to measure, but very, very important.
Comments or questions?
I have one more. I know these patient panels are done before the protocol is fully developed. Do you do any patient panels of their experience after they participated in a trial?
While we incorporate past study volunteers on another protocol, sometimes in our patient advisory boards, we haven't actually held one after a clinical trial has been done. But that's a very good area. It's an opportunity. We've done some quantitative research where after we've sent out surveys via sites after participation to get some feedback in that format. Certainly a patient advisory board could also be an avenue there to get some feedback. Any others? Well, if there's no additional questions, I just wanted to, again, thank you very, very much for all your time today. And I'll let Ken also say a few words.
Sure, thanks, Anique. Yeah, these were some good questions, and thanks, as Anique said, for giving us the opportunity to share with you what we're doing in this area. We see this, as Anique highlighted, as one of the critical areas that CISCRP wants to continue to support. You recall that triangle where we see this as such an important step in enabling the enterprise to solicit insights that really will help guide so much of our activity and ultimately lead to a much higher level of engagement and partnership with patients and their caring community, their healthcare provider community. So we see this as really essential, and we're looking forward to having an opportunity to interact with many of you, to collaborate with many of you.
Actually, Ken, we just had a question come in. Any feedback on how regulators are responding to this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Both, in our experience, both regulators and ethical review committees are very supportive of these efforts to solicit input. The key is, of course, that these are non-participants in actual trials when they're participating in an advisory board. They're patients, they're caregivers, they're people who understand their illness and have a real interest in sharing those experiences and their insights and impressions with us, with the research enterprise. So this is viewed as a very positive step and a critical way to amplify the voice of the patient, to shed light and provide insight into ways that we can improve a lot of the clinical research activity that all of us are supporting.
Great. Any questions before we sign off today? So I wanted to, again, echo Ken's comments. I just wanted to thank you again for participating in this call, and I hope that we've shared some helpful information. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Ken, and we'd be happy to help you. Or if you want to schedule a meeting with your team, please do not hesitate to reach out, and we would be happy to help you.